So it is 5:30, and I will call to order the study session regarding the possible revisions to the retail sales tax exemptions. I believe that's Director Farman. Thanks for sitting on the end where I can see you.
Yeah, it's better for me too. So thank you, Mayor. Appreciate it. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. This is a study session to review the city's sales tax exemptions, and that is in Article 4, Section 44210 of the Municipal Code. The reason and goal for reviewing the exemptions is to provide final sales tax exemptions to SUTS, which is the state's sales and use tax system. And that's necessary so eventually SUTS will be able to process the city's sales tax returns and payments once the city officially joins SUTS. Just as a reminder, all retail sales of tangible personal property by persons engaged in business in the city will be taxable unless specifically exempted. And the most recent sales tax code update was in 2010, so we are about due to review the exemptions anyway. And here is a full list of the current exemptions from the municipal code. The City Council does have the authority to maintain these exemptions, expand the list, or remove exemptions. And everyone should have gotten a confidential letter from the city attorney with considerations before making final changes to the exemptions. So in order to start a really good discussion on this, staff had met with the city attorney to facilitate a more informed discussion for council. We conducted some research by reviewing some other municipal codes related to exemptions, and we chose these following three city codes: Greenwood Village, because they are such a close neighbor to us, and then we chose Golden and Centennial because they are model code examples because their staff had participated in the Colorado Municipal League Sales Tax Committee.
Just a quick clarification. Can you define carry-out bag fee for me?
Bag fee that you pay on everything.
That's that extra 10 cents that you have to pay if you don't bring in your own bag.
Got it.
To like a grocery store or even department stores.
I thought that's what it was, but I wanted to be sure.
Sure.
I never pay it.
It doesn't apply
That's why
to us right now, so.
Because you bring your own bag.
Exactly.
Let's be clear.
BYOB.
I thought it was just because you don't ever do any of the shopping.
No, I do it all. And if I forget the carry-in bag in the car, it's like, okay, W.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to load it by hand.
We also included the city of Westminster in a more limited review, and that's in the council's packet as well. And the reason we have Westminster in there is when CML revised and produced their model ordinances, they actually used the city of Westminster because it's a more moderate sales tax code, so that's why they chose Westminster. So in addition, staff determined that these four common exemptions amongst the model cities, which are not currently exempt in our city code, warrant council's review for exemption status. The first two exemptions are mandated state fees that have been recently adopted by the state, and that spurred many municipalities to go ahead and add them to their sales tax exemption list. So we do have those on all of the model cities enclosed in the packet. And then staff also included food for home consumption and newspapers because those were common in all four of the model cities. These two exemptions contain mostly common wording, such as an example from Greenwood Village, the sale of food for domestic home consumption. And then they say, as defined in this article, so they further define food for home consumption as we would do in our definitions in the sales tax code. And if council directed, staff would likely propose our city to use the CML model language because they do have definitions for food for home consumption with a pretty broad definition. And they also have newspaper in the CML definitions. So these common municipal sales tax exemptions are suggested for standardization and tax simplification purposes, so it's easier for businesses to really have a standard playing field from city to city. And we also believe these exemptions would result in little to no impact on the city's revenues.
Doug, quick question for you. Why do we exempt cigarette sales?
They have,
Promoting unhealthy,
there's an additional excise tax on cigarettes already, which I think is pretty high. I don't smoke. But they have a separate excise tax.
We don't get that.
And the city actually receives some of those cigarette taxes that go through the state. We get an allocation. It's not a whole lot, but yeah.
That also seems to be pretty standard too. That really stuck out to me. I'm like, why?
Promoting unhealthy living.
I
Yeah.
think it is from a long time ago, but okay, if everybody does it, then fine.
We also wanted to bring these additional exemptions. We thought would also have value in bringing forward for council reviews. We have 4 more for further review. The first item is prescription drugs, and you will notice we do have prescription drugs in our exemptions, but it has varied definitions and applications in each of the 4 model city codes. And consequently, we believe that our code and exemption should have some clarification and maybe even add the definition to that. The broad question for this exemption would be if council would want to limit prescriptions and prosthetic devices to humans or expand that to animals. Because right now it's just open-ended and it's open for anybody's interpretation. So,
And do you want to discuss it? You want to go through and then we can come back and talk about it, or do you want to discuss it?
whatever's easiest for you, we can go through it and then we can come back to them as well and then kind of get some direction so we can move forward with hopefully a first reading on an ordinance to.
Yeah, why don't you go through the whole thing, and if something sticks with you, make a note, just to make sure that we get through your
Okay,
presentation.
that sounds good. After the prescription drugs, we also have garage sales listed here. Not super common with the model cities, but it was mentioned, and when we met with council members Holen and Wheel, we did talk a little bit about maybe limiting or having a kind of a bottom threshold on sales, which other cities really do not have any type of threshold, like a bottom threshold to have to collect and remit. But we believe garage sales might be the closest exemption to meet that goal. And then if council wanted to pursue that, you could come up with, having 1 garage sale a month or setting a certain amount of limitations on that.
Doug, with respect to that, how would you enforce that? Garage sale.
Yeah, it'd have to be, you have a neighbor that's having a garage sale every weekend.
Complaint based.
Then you
It
have
would be, it's a less than refined process.
would
And
think
I would just caution council, if you do want to go down, I've worked in communities that have had limitations by code on garage sales. And it's a invitation for neighbor versus neighbor conflict. It's quite the undertaking, I would offer.
But that's limitations on just doing it. That's not, limitations on whether sales tax applies or not causes confrontation?
They go hand in hand, I believe.
Really? That seems odd to me.
Well, let's go through, because I think we have some big picture, at least I have some big picture concepts as opposed to individual details. So-
Okay, great. So with garage sales, Golden and Westminster both have limits and both have garage sales with some limitations as exemptions. And then we did find a couple of other possible exemptions we just wanted to bring to your attention. And the next one would be software. Software types used to be exempted by the state quite a few years ago, and a lot of municipalities followed suit. And usually it was downloaded software or customized software, but that was quite a few years ago. So now the state has lifted their exemption, and most municipalities have lifted their exemption on software. But we did find that Westminster still has custom software as an exemption. So just a consideration for council if you wanted to look at software. The other exemption that we thought might be of value to council is alternative energy components. We know how the council really finds value in alternative energy sources, wind energy, solar. So if that's something that might be of merit to council, we could come up with some alternative language for an exemption. And Centennial also has language, and they have that exemption, so that's in council's packet, just as an example. And that's the only one that we found out of these 4 city codes. So tonight, staff is just looking for some general guidance, but we would like to put together an ordinance for first reading and hopefully keep moving along here with the ultimate goal of joining SETS. And I get phone calls every week from SETS saying, when are you going to join? And I'm sure they're getting some pressure from businesses because it does simplify their work when everything flows through the state. So anyway, that is our ultimate goal here. And obviously, we have to have these updated or maintained before we can join SETS. And our goal is to get the SETS resolution to council on May 16th if everything goes according to schedule. So at this, I can try to answer any questions council has.
Okay, well, can we go back, let's start, if you can go back to the common, or the exemptions currently in our code. We'll just kind of start there.
Okay, we can start there.
And, yeah, does anybody have any questions about this or any desire to suggest? And I assume you read the memo from the city attorney. So keeping that in mind, is there any questions or discussion about these?
There was one, I don't know, and I should know, but I liked the intent paragraphs that some of these municipalities embraced. And, you know, it more or less, I think, well, what I would encourage is if it's not specified, it's taxable, you know, which is what some of them say, more or less. I mean, they say it in better language than I, but still, I think it's helpful in that it doesn't leave a lot of room for interpretation. There's also clauses about likes and similars and all of that, you know, it's not extended by, the exemptions aren't extended by similarity and so on. So I think maybe we should be, well, what I would suggest is that we put something to that effect, that intent paragraph as a first paragraph to the code.
Okay,
Anyway,
yep,
ahead.
that sounds great.
Yeah.
Was there any, a particular example that stood out to you that you're,
Well, I
referring
mean,
to, or?
we could, no, I can't say that I was really so much in the particulars of it, but if, you know, for example, prescription drugs, is it humans, is it not? You know, I think we should be detailed in what we exempt, and at the same time, say if it's not specifically called out, then it's not, you know, it's subject to tax, it's not exempt in that.
And I could, in the Exhibit A, the Golden Tax Code, page 17 at the top, it says, "The list of exemptions shall not be increased by implication or similarity."
Right.
Is that kind of what you're talking about?
I mean, I would sort of opt for both, frankly, you know, that we have that intent paragraph, and then we also talk about no extensions for likes and similarities and so.
Susan, yeah?
In terms of the language in the other codes, I thought the Centennial Purposes and Interpretation Clause on the first page of it, it talks about we're doing this for uniformity, to be clear, to establish, it's not intended to increase the rate of tax. I mean, I think that's all really good language to have.
Is that what you were talking about?
Well,
What Susan was just referring to?
yeah, that's certainly a piece of it, but it's, well, like, yeah, Okay, this one, you're looking at
Centennial, page one.
Centennial.
Exhibit B, the first page.
And Susan, you're looking at 4120 of
Or
Centennial?
120 of the Centennial
Okay.
Municipal Code, purpose and interpretation. Yeah.
Okay. So thanks for that. And so as relating to our current, or did you have something more?
No.
Okay.
That was,
Yeah.
that was sort of an overarching comment rather than getting into the particulars. I think it's good to say which side the error is on,
Yeah.
if it's not specifically called out. That was really my concern.
Okay.
Okay.
Earl, did you?
Right, and I agree with that, but at the same time, we don't want to invite people to pick at us,
Right.
okay? I mean, that's, because we went through that when we talked, and in fact, the discussion was, hey, don't get too specific, because then you actually go the other way. And it's like, and my comment at that time was, I'm fine as long as we feel like the language that we're using is broad enough and general enough that it allows us to be in the position to be able to make the determinations as opposed to the taxpayer. Right?
Exactly.
Right, okay, that's, you're
Should
talking,
be-
okay,
should be our
good, that's
control.
good. The only other thing in that top section, and I don't know if that's coming, we're coming back down when we come later, but on prescription drugs, I would like to see it so that it's very clear that it's both for humans and for animals. I think that it should encompass drugs for animals, particularly in this
I
community.
agree. That was going to be, so let's, before we go there, these are current exemptions, and it feels like we're all pretty good here. Okay, can we go to the next slide then? And here's where that, or no, I'm sorry, this is,
You want to go to the third one, this one?
well, let's just kind of go in order. Let's talk about, go back a slide, yeah, this one. Were there, I think these all seem to make sense. Was there anyone who had questions or?
I am curious, the golden one, and I could look it up, I'm sure, but is it only SNAP that is exempted from tax on their food for home consumption, or is it both SNAP and regular food for home consumption?
There are some subtle differences in the language on all of these exemptions. And I'm
don't
trying
go
to find
grocery
that
shopping
specific
in
one in
Golden.
Golden, but
Yeah.
that's
Is what we're saying.
Yeah.
abbreviated.
Well, we do that today, right?
Because a lot of them will have
No, we don't.
We don't
definitions
have a
of,
grocery store.
know,
Right.
Really.
they have food for home consumption means food for domestic home consumption as defined in 7 USC, so a United States code for purposes of supplemental nutrition. And then they talk about food does not include chewing gum, seeds, plants to grow foods, prepared salads, salad bars. So theirs is a little bit different. And I know that CML has a pretty broad definition. And I can pull that up here. Oh, actually, CML is exactly the same. So Golden has adopted CML's definition.
What page was that on in Golden's?
It was in their definitions.
Okay. Words and phrases defined.
And I think there might be some room for clarification because there's the definition section of each code and then there's the exemption section of each code. And if the exemption just says food for home consumption, then you go to the definition, you know what you're exempting.
Right.
In Golden's case, it says the sale of food that is purchased by the medium of exchange commonly known as food stamps. And the sale of food is defined by Section 1786 of Title 42 of the United States Code. That is purchased with vouchers, checks, or similar certificates of exchange of the Special Supplemental Food Program. I'm not seeing anything that's just straight food for home consumption, unless I'm missing.
Okay, so that section doesn't refer to the food for home consumption definition. Okay. Well, I mean, what I think it's pretty common to just exempt.
It is, but I got a thought about that I
Yeah.
want to pass on. Where that comes from and where that came from and it passed in all constituencies with regard to, food is basic necessities, and they're thinking mainly of, to a large degree, lower income people. You did not want to do that. We don't have any of those people in Cherry Hills. Okay, we don't have any of those people in Cherry Hills. And I'm just going to throw this out for discussion purposes, and I tend to be one, it's like the value-added tax or a national sales tax. I tend to be one of those guys, get rid of the income tax and go, in other words, the more people use, that's where the taxes should come from, rather than increase of real estate taxes, things that you have to do at the end of the day. This would be an example of that. It's like going, okay, we don't need to worry about putting upon people in our community as a way to generate money for the city to utilize, which keeps us then from having to conceivably increase our millage rates, which gets assessed to everybody. It's just, it's a philosophical discussion that goes on, and that's where the exemption for, and then in many states, oftentimes, they really get down into the weeds, right? Hey, we exempt food, but we're not going to exempt soda. We're going to exempt these kinds of sundries, but we're not going to exempt those. And it all goes towards, hey, how do we deal with those that need it the most? And that's not what we have here in Cherry Hills. So the question is, should that same concept apply to what we're trying to do here? And I'm just raising it for a question because I think it's worthwhile to talk about.
Well, I think that plays into my overarching comment, perhaps this might be one place where we're not twins, Earl.
Hey.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that the concept of, a sales tax instead of property makes a ton of sense. But I don't think that's what we asked voters for last November. And my support for that initiative, and this is just me, other people might feel differently, but my support for that initiative all along was not in an effort to bring in more money for the city. It was not in an effort to completely rethink our tax base as a community. That initiative, in my mind, was to settle any doubt around practices that were already occurring. And so I tend to look at this and say, with the exception of the fact that exemptions are hard to undo, I tend to look at it and say, we could practically exempt everything. And then it would be back to kind of where it was. We don't really want to do that, but I feel like we should be more generous with our exemption because we weren't doing this necessarily to say we want people to start paying taxes on things they weren't paying on before.
Is that the case? Because what we wanted to do was basically saying, hey, people were paying taxes on Amazon deliveries, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I think means they were probably paying deliveries from Whole Foods.
Sure they are.
Yeah, probably.
But they weren't paying taxes on the food.
Well, they might have been.
I
if
think they
Amazon
were.
was-
We don't exempt it.
So they might have been.
You think Amazon was charging them taxes on milk and apples and stuff, when most jurisdictions don't tax it? I don't know.
That's a very good question.
I
I
guess
don't
what I'm
know.
saying is we
Yeah,
don't
and
know.
But-
We don't know.
And that's where I'm just coming from is, because I agree with exactly what you're saying,
But-
Katie,
but-
is that we were trying to do what was happening anyway, and I guess that'd just be a question of mine because, I mean, Whole Foods is owned by Amazon. I mean,
Right.
and if it's exempted, it's exempted. If it's not, it's not.
Earl, I've had a philosophical issue, though, with your, most people here can afford to pay for food, therefore we should reconsider whether to tax it or not. I think you're making an assumption there that we don't necessarily know. And I do think the philosophy behind it was food is an essential, an essential for people, and therefore you don't tax it. I don't think you can assume just because we are a predominantly wealthy community, that there are no people in this community that have financial issues. But I go back to, I don't think we should tax it because it's a necessity.
I guess
Regardless of your
Randy, yep.
where I'm at on it is I have a couple of again, overarching biases. I'd like to keep it simple, and I'd like to conform as best we can with the CML model code, because all of the complexities are just harder and harder to explain, and potentially harder and harder to implement accurately. If we end up with a big surplus, a surplus that's material, I should say, we can always go back and look at alternatives. But I think that that'll be easier if we don't, if we don't exempt, if we don't paint ourselves into a corner with exemptions.
But your statement about making it simpler and easier is actually more of an argument to exempt food because everybody else does.
Yeah, well, yeah, it sounds like they're only doing SNAP on Golden, but if that's more or less where CML was at on their standard codes, it kind of feels like, and philosophically, I think we probably weren't realizing a lot of tax revenue from foods being shipped into the city. Hard to know that, but so I don't think we're materially changing the financial impact, and at the same time, it just kind of fits with the mainstream, and that feels like a good place to be.
But one thing I wanted to come back and say, and again, the food thing is, a piece of this, but to the broader thing, I'm going to be coming at it more from the perspective of less exemptions. Until we go down the road and know what we see, and we can always change it, which is what Randy was just saying, et cetera. Okay, a subset of that is food, which I gave the philosophy, and I'm fine, but I wanted to raise it because I do think that it's something that we continue to talk about broadly, nationally, state, et cetera, with regard to taxes and taxing prerequisites and authority and how it operates. And I recognize it. To me, it's just it's a philosophy that drives more towards taxing on basically sales tax and moving away from income tax or real estate tax, that thing which is just imposed on people as opposed to, hey, you don't want to pay it, don't buy it. And that's sort of you've all seen those discussions before. So that's why I'm raising it, just to kind of, and you're right, Susan, you're absolutely right. And I don't mean to be sounding heartless in terms of whoever might not be able to afford in Cherry Hills, but it is a different situation than with regard to not taxing food, probably statewide, certainly within Denver, other communities, et cetera. So I just wanted to bring it up just as a matter of talking about it.
But when I read the Golden definition here,
They are more specific.
but I think they're just lifting the definition of food. I don't think they're saying food that's purchased only by people using food stamps.
In the definition, they are, but when they then talk about exemptions, they don't use
Okay,
food for home consumption in what's exempted.
Got it,
They have
okay.
their own, right. Yeah, that was so I Earl, I agree with you. In theory, because it is so difficult to remove exemptions, I do think we should start with being more modest. And then I also feel like just for myself, trying to be true to what I felt we were doing in November, one of the statements I kept making was that it was increasingly difficult to be the exception. And so as we look at these things, I would just encourage us to not make ourselves the exception again.
Exactly.
Right, in some other new way now. So when and where it makes sense, I think we should kind of go try to standardize ourselves like our fellow neighboring communities as much as possible.
And I basically agree with that, although if we push that too far, I'll start invoking the late Judge Scalia and saying, I don't care what other countries are doing, I care what we want to do, not what other people are doing.
Just for specificity, in the CML definition, they do exempt, hop, chewing gum, seeds, plants to grow food, things like that. So what I was trying to refer to when I'm saying food for home consumption would be the definition in the CML model code.
Yeah.
And Randy, I agree with you. I think we need to simplify it, keep it simple, and instead of coming up with complex definitions of things, I've read the CML code, and the definition of food there, to me, also is absolutely fine.
Does anybody know in like Greenwood Villages, for example, do they, when they talk about exemptions, I'm looking at, does it say food for home consumption and then therefore referring to that definition?
Sale of
Food for domestic home consumption as defined. Yeah, so great. So I think, are we in agreement that we would want to do something like
Yes.
where we want to exempt it as defined in that definition? Okay. And then any other questions about these other things here? Newspapers are exempt, Frida. Okay. Next, well, we don't have to, but next screen, let's move on to the next ones. Okay. I completely agree with Earl's comment about prescription drugs, particularly in our community.
So sorry, could we go back and just, just to get clarity for what the direction is for staff, the common exemptions, everyone, the direction is to
we're-
include them?
Yes, we
Okay,
think
thank you
those
so
should-
much.
we should also exempt those things. And then prescription drugs, I agree in a community like ours in particular, that where people keep animals, perhaps more so than a lot of other communities, maybe even more so than Centennial. Any other thoughts on that?
Well, and I don't know why I didn't notice this before, but the therapeutic devices, where is that defined?
Which one are you looking at?
That's Centennial.
Centennial?
I'm looking at Greenwood Villages, but
Centennial.
maybe it's not. It's Centennial where it's defined.
That's Exhibit B, yeah. Therapeutic devices.
It's also one of the CML standard definitions. Therapeutic device means devices, appliances, related accessories that correct or treat a human physical, just, that says human, but.
Centennial on page 23,
Yeah.
it's pretty broad and it talks about humans or prescription drugs for animals, all sales of insulin.
And page 12 of Centennial says therapeutic devices means devices, appliances, or related accessories that correct or treat a human physical disability or surgically created abnormality.
It would seem that
is
that
a-
probably isn't a very correct definition though today. My guess is, huh? There's probably a better one.
Well, that's exactly 98, definition 98 in the model code.
I can't, that's.
It may be.
In a blue state, I'm amazed they're using that language.
Yeah. And again, it may be something we want to refine, but I think that's where they got it. Is it? Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so are we,
I'm good with it.
we good with that, including animals and then otherwise similar to, so similar to Centennial then is what we're saying?
I think
Okay,
it's the only question there is Centennial's definition does specifically say therapeutic devices are for humans. And I guess
And
the
so
question is,
So does the CML.
yeah.
do you want to expand? Or if we're doing humans and animals, including therapeutic devices for humans and animals? I'm just saying that it's a difference.
I have no
That's in the
idea.
It's,
definition here.
I believe there are some horse therapy devices that are used.
Well, I'm sure there are for all kinds of pets.
Yeah.
You're right. I just think that you can do a lot of home therapy for dogs and cats easier than you can for horses. Those are huge beasts that.
This says it has to be with a written recommendation from a licensed doctor, so, at least in the Centennial, therapeutic devices of over $100.
And I think that's the way to go then. I mean, in other words, because you're going to get, you're not going to put something on a horse without getting it from a vet. And I think that's the way, because otherwise, the next thing you know, what you don't want is a little ball for little Max. I mean, we got to keep.
He has
them-
anxiety.
Forget it. It's like, hey, whatever's described by a doctor or a vet, that's what we're exempting, right?
Yep.
I mean,
Okay, so change the definition of therapeutic devices to include animals. Okay.
and prescribed.
And CML has definitions for all of those, if you're comfortable using CML's definitions.
Yeah, I think,
And is medical
Well,
marijuana taxed in Colorado? Or just recreational?
Kathy's saying she doesn't think so.
Okay, I was just curious.
Doug, the CML definition is just human, but we wanted to include animals. And I think the prescribed by doctor notion's probably also a good, as long as we're clarifying.
Should say doctor and/or vet.
Yeah, good point.
Okay.
Good point.
So let us look into that a little bit, because the idea is really to stay with the CML standard definitions as much as possible. So if there's another way to get to the same destination, we'll consider it.
Okay.
All right.
I think, Susan, you made me think of something else, right? The mushroom bill that passed currently does not allow municipalities the possibility of opting out. So, no, it's healing centers. Those people aren't necessarily doctors, or I don't know if that would, oh, they are doctors? Yeah. So would that then be considered a prescription medication?
Don't quote me on that. I haven't looked at that since it passed.
I think that's not, actually, that does sound
But-
right, though, that they,
But I definitely
Can't
remember
just be
chalking
like
it up
me.
mentally to, oh, at least that's a safeguard. That's
yeah,
better
I'm not
than-
going to just create a
than a-
healing center in my garage.
Yes.
Yeah, well, and I would need to clarify that, but I recall with medical marijuana, there were no prescriptions written because it has to be authorized, through the whole,
Okay.
federal process. So I'll double check that, but I would be surprised if.
Well, we probably just, I don't think it's going to be that big of a, we'd spend more time talking about it than it would make a difference. Okay, any other thoughts on prescription? Okay, how about garage sales?
I do want to address garage sales for a second, and that is, Chris, your comment about neighbors versus neighbors with garage sales. I also don't want to be in a situation, there's a number of things garage sale like. There's I want to sell my extra whatever.
Craigslist.
Craigslist sales, eBay sales, veggie stands to the extent that it happens infrequently. Lemonade stands have been the great pariah of beating up on little kids trying to sell lemonade as a taxable or as an event that then puts them into a milieu of regulatory world. I want to just make it clear that, to me, all of those type of things are exempted as sort of one time. And where it comes into play is that on the memo that we got from you, Doug, in page 3 of the suggested bill, the section 4410 definitions, engaged in the business in the city. When you go down and look at A, B, and C, they make sense to me as legitimate ones that we're trying to cover here. But then D says basically anybody who, it says owns, leases, rents, or otherwise exercises control over real property within a taxing jurisdiction. And that's, you are exercising business if you sell something just because you are a owner, leaser, otherwise exercise control over real property or personal property. And where I'm going with that is, again, it keys into this idea that lots of little one-time sales, or even if they're not one-time sales, they're smaller, they're not people who are really in the business of conducting business, and I don't want those people covered to get into this process.
The question I had is that, didn't we reference in here somewhere that there's some sort of minimum amount?
For SUTs,
Right?
SUTs participation, state statute currently sets that requirement at $100,000, that threshold.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
And to some of these local-based lemonade stands, honey, et cetera. You do, if you start carving out and trying to draw those lines, that can get complex. Typically, that can be dealt with in an enforcement manner. Just
What I would suggest is if council's in agreement with that approach, though, let staff do our best to try and reflect the direction you're giving us.
Yeah, I would agree.
There's,
that-
there's some nuance there that I think gets a little tricky, so.
Yeah, I have no problem with the kids selling lemonade and all the rest of it. I'm trying to rack my brain thinking about, have we opened up something that we might regret having opened up versus not enforcing it?
If you sell your car,
Well, here's
From
my,
your-
That's where I was coming.
and then if you sell a car, you're one step short of an estate sale. And.
Well, but so here's, let me throw my philosophical thing out there. Would much rather have people sell their deceased loved ones' belongings, their kids' clothes that they can't use anymore, than throw them away because it's too much of a hassle? Or, I mean, I guess they could donate them to charity perhaps, but
No, but what about the person who's operating a resale business out of their house? You know, where they buy stuff on
well,
Craigslist
we have
and then they
commercial, I
resell
mean,
it
we
on-
do have commercial, I guess we'd want it, but we do have limits on commercial use of your home. And so I don't think that
So
would,
just attack, or the person who's having the garage sale once a month, doing the same thing essentially, buying stuff on.
Yeah,
eBay and-
that's.
We just don't have
it's
that.
just- But we don't want that. I mean, you know, I've been to a bunch of garage sales, and I've had a bunch, okay, that are not typically of what you find bought and sold in Cherry Hills Village. I mean, it's the little junky this and that's what I want exempted.
yeah.
I don't want the Maserati put in the garage saying, hey, it's a garage sale, give me
Literally, yeah.
75 grand. No, I mean,
Yeah.
or, you know, hey, I happen to have a Van Gogh here that I'm selling out of my garage. I mean, that's what we don't want. And I don't know whether that's taken care of by a dollar value, which it could be, or whether it's taken care of by that wouldn't be, but I mean, by the way, how many times, I've never had more than one garage sale, probably once every 3 years. I mean, if you're doing it once a year, that's a lot. I mean, that's a lot.
Well, it goes back to my question, how do you enforce it? Let's say it isn't exempt. Somebody going to go out there and the kid sells $100 worth of garage.
That's a good point, though, too.
There's no way to enforce it. That's why I think it's exempt.
Well, there are all sorts of enforcement schemes for all of this stuff. It usually involves getting a business license. You then register every time you have it. That's the part I was getting into earlier, where they go hand in hand. And once you start going down that road that you decide you want to get into that business, it is hard to untangle yourself from it. I'll just say this: if councils I haven't heard anybody disagree with what Councilor Ebert and Holland have just said, though. I think you said the little junkety things.
Yeah.
Yes, the little junkety things, there's a desire to, and lemonade stands and all that. Exempt that, but anything above that, we're not. Let us, if that's the general agreement, let us try and figure that out.
Okay. I just also wanted to say that I learned a new word today. Where was it? No, I looked up how to pronounce it. Eleemosynary.
Yeah.
I was like, what on eleemosynary? What?
I learned that from Laura Christmas.
It just is like,
Spelling bee champ.
it's number 2 in what we already exempt, and it means having to do with a charity. I was like, what? I have never heard of that before. Anyway, okay, so I think we're good there. Software, any desire to? Nope. Okay.
Okay.
Alternative energy components.
I just want to note that in our revised master plan, we did encourage an awful lot of alternative energy discussion and promotion. I think this is sort of in keeping with that if we do offer an exemption for it. But, I think if you start talking about this piece as an exemption item, it gets you on the slippery slope of what else you might want to be doing. And maybe we're not ready to have that discussion yet.
I agree.
Well,
That's where I come from, which is it's too early at this point. Things change, and they are changing so quickly, it's like, let's wait to see kind of how this all plays out.
if we tax it at this point and decide we want to promote it, we could offer some sort of a credit or, something along those lines.
Rebate
that would be maybe a little easier to administer. Yeah, rebate.
I mean, those systems aren't cheap, obviously.
Right.
I mean, they do add up to a lot of savings if you do choose to do that. I think that the idea of giving people a break for doing what we're asking them to do in the master plan is a good idea. Maybe this isn't the avenue in terms of an exemption. I do like the idea of coming up with another mechanism to somehow offset some of that.
I think a rebate type program is a great idea, because then it can end at some point, right? And
Right.
we don't have to worry about the legal implications. Okay,
And let's hope that our master plan continues to remain in effect in the
yeah,
next week or two.
exactly.
They'll have to pry it out of my cold, dead hands.
Okay, did anybody have any other things that you wanted, I know we didn't talk about this, I don't necessarily think we should pursue it, but I remember discussions, maybe it was in Denver, around exempting things like diapers and feminine hygiene products, and is anybody else doing that? And if not, then let's not, but if they are.
I think they are, and I've
think it's a great
heard that
idea.
too, yeah. Those are somewhat common, but they
They're
were not-
necessities, they're not food for home consumption, but they are necessities.
I'm in favor of that, but I think back to Randy, we need to keep this simple instead of expanding it.
Okay.
One thing that, if we pass that part, one of the things we talked about when we met with, Randy and I met with staff, a couple of things that I brought up, and you said you were going to take care of them during the exemption phase, as opposed, and that was in 44210, there were some wording changes that needed, because there was a couple of things where we didn't put in exempt from taxation. It was an edit that needed to be done. And then in 4410, definitions for purchase or sale, and in terms of cleaning it up to basically deal with LLCs, which wasn't dealt with. And so, as I recall, they said, hey, we're going to deal with that at the exemption time, so.
Yeah, the dissolution of LLCs in addition to dissolution of
Right.
corporations, correct?
Right.
Yep, and some wording changes to just
Right.
make it consistent.
Great.
In the first reading.
Actually, I know that nobody else really expressed a lot of interest in this, but could you look at what Inglewood, Denver, and Greenwood Village do with relation to things like diapers? And what I don't want to do is penalize, a lot of those things get delivered, diapers in particular. I don't want to penalize people in Cherry Hills Village for buying them one way when they could drive to King Soopers and spin the gas and whatever, in Greenwood Village or Denver or Inglewood, and buy it without paying sales tax. So I'd just like to see what they're doing, and if they're not exempting it, then,
Yeah, I believe Littleton might still have that exemption, but
And they're not a direct neighbor. I'm really most interested in the places where people in Cherry Hills Village most likely shop for those items.
Sure.
Which are Denver, Inglewood, and Greenwood Village.
Mayor Brown, do you mind if we bring that information to you during the first reading? Just
Yep, that'd be great. Thank you. Okay,
so we will take all of that input and hopefully craft an ordinance on first reading. At least we can discuss that further on May 2nd, if everyone is comfortable with that.
okay. I just got a text message that they're still not meeting. So we will
There is-
recess then for 10 minutes until 6:30.
I did just see a tweet, though, that they are still planning to try and do something tonight.
I feel like it's a law law and order criminal trial. The longer the jury stays out, the better it is for the crook.
Yeah, exactly.
We start to feel better about it.
You know what they say about speed kills? That's exactly what's wrong with this bill.
Oh, exactly.
I know.
Because in order to get it through, they're gonna just destroy
We
things.
didn't get into this problem in 6 weeks. This problem in 6 weeks.
The big thing is, and I think both of you guys said it. By the way, now that we haven't done it yet,
All right, and it is now 6:31, so I'll call the city council meeting to order. Roll call of members, please.
Counselor Eber?
Here.
Counselor Holen?
Here.
Counselor Will?
Happy to be here.
Counselor Sheldon is absent. Counselor Blum?
Here.
Counselor McGuire?
Here.
Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We had a presentation from the police department scheduled for this evening, but we have decided to reschedule that to a time when Counselor Sheldon can be present. He is unfortunately ill this evening. So we will move on to audience participation. Just as a reminder, thank you for being here, first of all, and when you come up to the podium, please state your name and address for the record. And there's a little colored timer there for you. So the first person is Sherry Lee.
Do I press the button? Or is
And
that-
Ms. Lee, sorry, before you start, let me just ask a quick question of the city attorney. Ms. Lee is signed up to speak twice on two different issues.
Typically, we let comment for each person that's what your rules of procedure provide, I believe.
Is one comment period. So could you please just address both of your concerns at the same time?
How about I just address the first one and I'll come back next time and address the other?
Okay, that's fair enough.
Okay,
Thank you.
Sounds good. My name is Shari Lee. I live at 4213 South Colorado Boulevard. And I wanted to talk about an idea I have regarding Kent Denver. So my idea is to start a community liaison committee with Kent Denver. I'm a neighbor of Kent's, and I know that the relationship with Kent has ebbed and flowed over the years, particularly in relationship to who the headmaster happens to be at any one time, and that there's been some pretty contentious issues over the last few years. And my idea is to avert some of those by forming a community committee to Kent that has neighbors on it, maybe a council member, perhaps the headmaster, and some students as well, to talk about some of these issues and get them out in the open and work together in a more positive manner. I think that Kent provides a lot of assets to the community. It's open space, it's less dense housing. I think it's great to have a school nearby, quite honestly. But conversely, it causes a lot of traffic, it's noisy, it takes a lot of resources. So again, there's give and take here. I think that one of the priorities here is communication. And because there has been so much variance between headmasters, 3 headmasters ago, he was very into being eco-friendly and reaching out to the community and being wonderful. 2 headmasters ago kind of is where a lot of the problems started, and it was all about Kent grow, 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 and it really didn't matter what people felt. And I think we now have a headmaster who may be somewhere in the middle. But I think some of the things this committee could address effectively are, for example, here's one idea I've had, is traffic. So none of us like the traffic that happens from Kent. And this is a little off the wall. However, we have surrounding our village many different parking lots belonging to churches, belonging to synagogues, belonging to other organizations. There's parking lots on Bellevue, there's parking lots on Hamden, there's parking lots on Clarkson. I'm not so sure about University. And I think, why can't Kent Denver work with the churches to potentially have students park in those lots and bus students from there and reduce some of the traffic flow in the village? It's just one idea. Maybe Kent Denver could even think about eve buses to do that and really cut down traffic. Of course, it would require cooperation from the synagogues and churches and so on, obviously. But it's a thought. It's something worth talking about, how we can all get together and maybe make it better in the village. Plus, I think it's good for the kids. We're all talking about the environment right now. Why not get the kids more involved in these discussions? I breached this idea with the headmaster a few months ago. And I can't say he was enthusiastic. I can't say he was negative either. His first comment was, why just Kent? Why not everybody? Why not St. Mary's? Why not the synagogues? Why not the churches? I said, why not? You know, I don't see a problem with bringing everybody into the picture. For me, being a neighbor of Kent, that was more important, and I think Kent really significantly impacts half the village that is east of University. But it could involve all these groups, and I think it would be win-win for the village. So just wanted to propose that idea tonight.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming, and staff has that information, and we'll follow up. Tori Leviton.
Good evening, Tori Leviton, 3901 East Quincy Avenue. I would like to talk about the ownership of 90 Mead Lane. Thank you again for all your volunteer time and hard work for the city of Cherry Hills Village. I come to you today to strongly protest any consideration of sale of 90 Mead Lane. It would directly contradict our master plan. Word for word, the goal is to increase and protect the amount of village-owned open space. It also specifically states in the Parks, Trails, and Recreation section that our number one strategy to implementing the master plan is to encourage open area preservation and open space acquisition. 90 Mead Lane is already acquired open space. And although it may not be as scenic or special as other areas of our village, it already abuts a major city park and provides a valuable component to our wildlife corridors, as well as potential future recreational value. Several years ago, PTRC already set a precedent that in absolutely no case, never, ever, is it in the city's interest to vacate, transfer, or sell any land anywhere at any time under any circumstance. In fact, one current council member zealously advocated for this stance, which upholds that even a short trail that leads nowhere is still not up for sale or transfer. Esteemed colleagues and council, even considering selling 3% of our public land is an insincere representation of your constituents. In opposition to the oaths each of you has taken, and is against your sworn duty to uphold the master plan of Cherry Hills Village. Precedent has already been set to never cede village-owned land. Kindly consider working on implementing the master plan through more land acquisition, not less. Please protect these sacred lands. Thank you for your time and have a blessed weekend.
Thank you very much. That's it for our comment period for tonight, unless, yep, Ms. Diffendahl.
Hi, 5701 East Stanford Drive. Because Ryan is here, I want to say a huge thank you to the work that you've done on Holly with the closures. It has been a nightmare. And one day I came in and I was really frustrated because I had 2 hours of my day just sitting extra in my car just in Cherry Hills Village, which blew my mind. So I came in, Ryan met me, and I said, Ryan, we got to fix this. This is horrible. And it's for a month. And I promise you, I will put my thumb on you until you get it done within a month. If it goes one day over, I will be mad. And sure enough, instead of trying to fight with me, it was, all right, Ms. Diffendahl, let's get the map out. We're going to figure this out. Because I know that corner better than he did, but he knows the constraints of the project better than me. And we together came up with a plan. And he was like, let's move this, a stop sign here, there. Let's do the things that we did. Back up stuff so we have more visibility from Stanford onto Holly. And honestly, you got the project done less than a month, I noticed. Congratulations, but thank you. our neighborhood totally appreciates the work that you do. And I just think that really shows how amazing Cherry Hills is that you can come into a city building, you can talk to exactly the person who's in charge of the job, and they do a magnificent job. So I want to say thank you. I also want to highlight that and honor an officer who medically retired recently, and her name is Officer Jen Callahan, and she has a special place in my heart as a resident because after our first break-in, she responded to a call where I was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. And I left my phone inside when our alarm went off. She came in and with another officer and met me in my driveway where I had taken my kids out, but left my phone inside where my husband can't get a hold of me. So dispatch had plugged us together through her. And she said, "Ma'am, what can I do for you?" And I said, "I don't know, I'm too scared." And she saw me sobbing in a place I didn't want to be. And so she said, "Let's just go inside and let's talk about this." So when I went inside, it was 2 months after our break-in, and she goes, "Oh my God, you got a new dog." And honestly, it was so shocking, and everything I love about that our police department wrapped in one. It was something that got me out of my fear, but it also was that our officers, the littlest things they noticed. I had gotten a dog 2 weeks prior, and she noticed when just being on patrol, they notice the little things. And that's what I just want to say, thank you. Thank you to our officers for all that they do. We don't even know half of what they do because they do it so seamless. They do it within the constraints that we and our expectations expect of them. And I want to make sure we know that. But also one part about the situation with Officer Callahan is that she medically retired, which highlights the need for, if our officers, unless they are injured or shot and killed in the line of duty, they have no pension. And that is something that I really hope in the future that you guys fix because it's so important. They serve and protect us. She was here for 17 years and she just qualified for FPPA in the 100% disability. And she now has a new job in Inglewood and she's loving it. And I just thank you to Officer Callahan for your integrity, for your service to our community. But I wanted to highlight that because she was such a big part of this community and all the calls that she responded to. But also I want to thank Mayor Brown, you're probably not going to expect this, and Mayor Pro Tem Whale. I am so impressed with the level of transparency that you guys have had in your term. It's been years since we've had that. So from me to you, I just want to say thank you and keep it up because if you don't, I'm going to say something about it. So thank you guys for all that you do. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It's always nice when people come to city council meetings to say thank you. So we really, really appreciate it. Okay, moving on to reports from members of city boards and commissions. Moving on to the consent agenda, we'd like to remove the minutes. There are a couple of minor changes, but does anyone have anything else to remove? Okay.
Move that we approve the consent agenda with the exception of the minutes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? For the minutes, I know Councilmember McGuire, you had a change.
Sorry. On page 15, it was a man that called, not a woman, so it should be a resident. Oh, never mind. I misread it.
Okay.
I take that back.
So I had 2 small changes on page 9. It says about 2/3 of the way down the page, Mayor Brown noted that Martin Lane was private. All of Martin Lane is not private. I think it should say Mayor Brown noted that the end of Martin Lane was private.
Section.
Yeah, or that section of Martin Lane was private, something along those lines. And then on page 11, I'm going to confess that maybe I never noticed this before, but the 4th paragraph, Councilor Sheldon moved, and then it just takes the text that's from the memo, but the second sentence says, "I further move." Is that the way we normally do that? Where he?
No, I usually change it from
Okay.
Irma, so thank you for noticing that.
So yeah, then just that. And those are my only two changes.
Move to approve the minutes as amended?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Oh, and one abstention. Because Councilmember Eber was not present at the meeting last time. Okay. Unfinished business. We have Council Bill 1, Series 2023, amending Chapter 4, Article 4, concerning retail sales tax pursuant to voter approval granted on November 8th, 2022. Second and final reading. Sorry, and that's Director Farman.
Thank you. We had this issue earlier, and I'm trying to get this PowerPoint up. Just one moment, please. It likes to make changes on its own there. Good evening. We do have, it's not, it's coming up. What's that? Back here? Oh, I did keep it. All right, thank you for your patience. We do have a second reading of Council Bill 1, Series 2023, which would amend Chapter 4, Article 4 of the Retail Sales Tax Code. There are two major definitional changes to discuss this evening, and one is economic nexus. In 2018, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of South Dakota, a state which required internet sellers doing business in the state of more than $100,000 in sales or more than 200 transactions, even without physical presence in the state, to collect retail sales tax. This ruling by the Supreme Court supported economic nexus. And as a result, in 2020, the CML, Colorado Municipal League, along with other home rule municipalities, developed a model ordinance related to economic nexus. As we all know, last fall, village residents approved ballot question 2A to update the city's sales tax code, requiring persons engaged in business in the city, which includes delivering into the city, to collect retail sales tax. This is the second major definitional code change amended in tonight's ordinance. This is the timeline that we're going through to update the sales tax code, and there are multiple steps to this to implement 2A. We have not made any changes to this timeline, so right now we're still on track. Oh, my battery's gone. Can you pull yours up?
Yeah, we have it in the memo.
Okay. Everybody's heard this before anyway. Phase 1 of this project is the ordinance tonight on second reading, and that should complete Phase 1. Phase 2 started with the exemption discussion earlier this evening, and it may also include reviewing sales tax licensing and other code changes as needed. And our target date to end Phase 2 is May 31st. Phase 3 is calendared to start in June with a review of the city's compliance and enforcement of sales tax. If we look at section 4410 and the definition changes in your packet, economic nexus, that means a person between the city and a person that has a connection with the city, not having physical nexus in the state, but a connection is established by making retail sales into the city, and also in the previous calendar year exceeded the amount in CRS 3926, which is currently $100,000. Thank you. Look at you. Or 90 days has passed in the current calendar year has made retail sales tax in the state. This creates an economic threshold for economic nexus. I need to be able to, oh, thank you. The other major proposed definitional change tonight is engaged in business. This definition is revised in subsection E regarding a vendor making more than one delivery into the city, and it removes the requirement by common carrier. There is one additional section F to qualify as engaged in business in the city. A retailer or vendor will qualify as engaged in business if it has economic nexus. So in summary, the city's code update would require sales tax collection on persons selling tangible personal property that has economic and or physical nexus. The city's definition of economic nexus includes a reference to marketplace facilitator, which is a definition recommended for addition to the city code. And a marketplace facilitator is a person who uses its own physical or electronic marketplace to facilitate sales, such as Amazon or eBay. A marketplace seller has an agreement with that facilitator and sells their tangible personal property through the marketplace facilitator's market. And another new definition is multi-channel seller, which is a merchant selling tangible personal property on more than one sales channel, such as a physical store and also online. Other definitional changes include purchase or sale, which is being updated to be consistent with the tangible personal property definition. This definition is also from the Colorado Municipal League project. And retailer is a new definition, and it will be used interchangeably in the code with the term vendor. And finally, retailer contractor is a new definition that captures the term contractor as a retailer of building supplies, construction materials, or other tangible personal property. These three new definitions coincide with CML's 2016 simplification project. Here are other additional Article 4 code change for consideration this evening. Section 4430 updates sales tax licensing from a business with a retail storefront to include businesses engaged in business in the city. A more detailed sales tax licensing discussion may be part of Phase 2. And 4440 is repealed due to being outdated. Section 4450, a place of consummation of sale or completion of sale, would now be tied to the state's economic nexus threshold. More code section changes, 44110 would be updated to impose taxes on vendors that are engaged in business in the city, referring to the updated definition. 44310 is a key section which describes vendor types that are liable for tax collection and remittance. This section includes a new subsection D, which describes marketplace sales and tax collection obligation. So this section also outlines the marketplace facilitator responsibilities to collect and remit on its own behalf if directly engaged in business in the city, and also on behalf of the marketplace seller. The facilitator bears the responsibility for collecting and remitting all sales taxes on tangible personal property transactions on their site. So for example, Amazon sells its own brand products directly to consumers and also operates as a facilitator for marketplace sellers. So it will collect sales taxes on all of those transactions on their site. Staff did review these recommended changes with council members Wheel and Holland on March 15th, and they provided additional input. Our next steps would be, after this evening, continued review of Phase 2, as mentioned earlier, and then Phase 3 would be scheduled to start on June 6th. And there have been no changes to the proposed council bill between the first reading and the second reading. here is the recommended motion for council to approve the council bill. And I can answer any questions about that.
Okay. Do we have any questions? I actually have a question, and I apologize if I didn't notice this last time. I know this is a little bit of my soapbox, so I didn't realize that we were back to the requiring everybody to register for a business license in Cherry Hills Village again, a sales tax license. I think that is an enormous burden on.
Yes, very good comment. We are still reviewing the sales tax and business licensing portion, so we will probably be reviewing that and bringing back some edits to council as part of phase 2.
Okay.
So that is not final.
Because this, so I'm just, the proposed, well, this says on page 4 of the memo, currently the code only requires licensing for businesses with a retail storefront. The proposed amendments to section 4-430 require a sales tax license for all persons engaged in business in the city. So now everybody that is meeting our new definition of engaged in business has to go get a sales tax license.
And that makes it sound very official, but what we might come up with is just a sales tax account.
Exactly.
Because we'll have to be able to keep track of their records and payments and collection
Right,
and so
okay.
forth. So Laura and I actually went over to Greenwood Village to see how they've been operating. And so we're still coming up with various ideas on how to process those.
Well, I guess I just have, and I don't get to vote, so this is up to you, but I would just have issues approving this as it is because people would, in theory, by this, all of a sudden be required to start getting licenses.
But I think part of the process, I think part of the situation was we were pushing really, really hard to get this done as quick as possible. And where this is coming from, I think, is that, hey, you are going to come back. That's what I'd understood. You're going to come back in phase 2 and with some further, because it's a complicated thing, and to come back with some additional language that's going to amend this with regard to how we'll take it so that, the person selling honey is not going to be sitting there with a thing. Because again, we've pushed so hard to get this thing going, and I think, at least that's my understanding as to why we're taking this
That's
approach.
correct. Another way is if it doesn't have to change, we can keep the status quo for the time being, but that's a very short time being. And there is a state law regarding the requirement of business licenses that you can't charge for it now, and then there's another one that comes into play by July 1, and we're well in mind of that. And in fact, sales tax legal experts in the state are thrashing around that bill and what it means and how to incorporate that into municipal codes as we speak. So we'll be coming back.
Well, I'll leave that up to you all then. But.
And my sense, Doug, was that because we raised the same issue, didn't want to make a whole bunch of people have to do applications and all the bureaucracy. My sense was that we kind of were leaving the door open to sort of redefine what sales tax license meant, and it could be something as simple as an account number, going forward once we understood the process, what's that's required.
That's the way I envision it, that an account number would be such as a license. Greenwood Village actually mails those, or emails if they have the email, the license to the vendor even though they're out of state. So obviously we have such a small staff, we were trying not to create a lot of extra time burden on our staff. And then we also need to devise forms, which would be left up to the finance director to come up with some type of application form, because we'll have to have their federal ID number and their address.
And this is where it goes off the rails for me.
Yeah, and that's why we were pushing that to phase 2
Yeah.
to design and finalize that system.
We have to collect some basic information. There's no option on just the basics. The tax ID number, for example. The business tax, the tax license that we have here is really, honestly, a placeholder. And so there's going to be an opportunity to come back and look at it, especially as this topic is going through these. It potentially may change. The landscape may change here in a few weeks. So we're going to have to collect something.
Yes, but so section, B, you have to, you're only gonna, such license shall be granted and renewed only upon application, stating the name, address, so they've got to fill out an application. Then they, every year, have to resubmit that application. We're just making it very,
So, and
yeah.
one thing that's changed in my mind is going through this with Kathy and Doug and everything is that before I was thinking of the sales tax license and the remittance of sales tax as separate things. Like they're not exempt, but they weren't required a sales tax license. And since then, it's really come about that those should not be separated. If you're collecting sales tax, you should have a sales tax license, especially with our new system. We're gonna need information from them to have an account number and get it in our system. So the details of renewing every year, for example, that might change. And this requirement for in-city, engaged in business, non-retail storefront sales to get a sales tax license is not going to be on the books the way it is for a year. We're going to change that very quickly. We just need to see how SUTS kind of works out in order to not have to go back and forth on it. But that's just food for thought.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Director Farman, but when we join SUTS, the idea is that SUTS will provide information to us that is essentially the same kind of information as the licensing requirement. And that will be the method by which these remittances are tracked. This is not tied up neatly in a bow for you today. I completely agree with you. It kind of frankly goes against my grain, but we're sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place on the timing.
And make sure I understand, the definition of engaged in business in the city does have that 100,000 minimum. So we're not saying that, every photographer that takes family portraits has to rush out and get a license and probably won't ever have to get a license.
So the threshold of $100,000 is the economic nexus, which is one of the prongs of the definition of engaged in business.
Right, and so.
If they have a physical nexus,
Yes.
then the threshold is 0, basically.
Right, but if they, if they're a photographer taking photos out of their home, which is somewhere else, then there is no physical nexus.
Right, if they're delivering those photos into the city, you're right, they would have to meet that economic nexus.
Okay. Because those are the kind, I know, like.
Whether you go out to Roxborough Park.
Like my kid's headshots, that
Yes.
poor photographer, her head's exploding.
Yes, no.
Over where, she's charging Denver sales tax because we took the pictures in Denver, even though her business is.
Well,
I
that's different, right?
But her business is located somewhere else. Is it where you took the pictures, or where your business is located, or where you're delivering them to, or
It's
where?
of the destination.
Usually the place of consummation of
Yeah.
the sale, the destination sourcing rules that are articulated in state law,
Okay.
which are adopted by the.
Yes. Okay. Those were delayed and delayed. They're finally in effect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, they're in
You
state.
say that so confidently.
I know, I'm sorry. That's the going against law school training 101, but.
Fair enough. I know that, I've said my piece about business licenses.
Anything else?
Other
Okay.
comments, anybody? No? Okay.
I move to approve Council Bill 1, Series 2023, a bill for an ordinance of the City of Cherry Hills Village, amending Chapter 4, Article 4 concerning retail sales tax pursuant to voter approval granted on November 8, 2022, on second and final reading.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. It's a roll call vote.
Counselor Eber?
Aye.
Counselor Holen?
Aye.
Counselor Real?
Aye.
Counselor Blum?
Aye.
Counselor McGuire?
Aye.
And that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. There is no new business, and so we will move on to reports. I'm not going to belabor, you all know what I have been spending my time with on Senate Bill 23-213. As I understand it, the committee is back in session, and I will reserve any further report till after that time. Go down here to Susan.
I received an email from a resident in my district requesting that we consider having the city produce an annual Quincy Farm report containing, listing the activities that took place at the farm, what direct funds were spent at the farm by the city, and then also questioning, was there some place on the city website where we listed the activities that were going on at Quincy Farm. Emily and I spent some time talking about this. The most recent annual report that the Land Preserve presented did list the activities and the number of people that attended them. And in the email, this resident said, well, I'm really not looking for what the Land Preserve said, but I want that information to come from the city. Realistically, we would provide that information based on what the Land Preserve told us, so I'm not sure that we're adding another layer of anything on top of that report. Now, I didn't find a place, and Emily, I think, already put in, right, a link to the Quincy Farm website where the events are listed. But I noticed it takes it to the main page, Emily. I'm wondering if we could have that link go directly to the programming page. Is that possible? Sure, I can. Okay. But interestingly, and then the amounts that are spent on Quincy Farm in the most recent city budget, there are 2 line items. I think it was the most recent one, right? There are 2 line items of what was spent at the farm 2021, I believe, because the 2022 numbers weren't done by the time we published them.
That's right. We had 2020 and 2021 that are the audited
Right.
financials.
So those lines were in there, but in the new format that you're using, those line items are not broken out, and that's certainly something anyone can get by calling into the city, but it's not something that we list anywhere. What was interesting to me, Chris, though, in thinking about this financial side of it, is I didn't see anywhere where once we've audited our city spending of last year or financial statement from last year maybe, is there somewhere on the website where that's posted, where that information is laid out, or not on a line-by-line basis?
Well, they're not going to be on a line-by-line item basis, no. But they should be on the website. You're absolutely right.
But a link to the full audit report is absolutely on the website.
Right.
Yes.
So you eventually could get to that information if you were diligent enough.
It will not say Quincy Farm,
You won't get to the Quincy Farm.
because that's in the
And I mean,
Catherine
I guess the
Anderson.
question is, do we want to, is there any reason not to have somewhere on the website where you can find what did the city spend last year on a line-by-line basis?
We absolutely could do that. That information you could find online right now as far as what's budgeted by going to the proposed budget
Right.
in the December council meeting. But the budget book itself doesn't contain that line-by-line information.
Yeah,
So
and his question really was, can we not see what was, I understand what's budgeted, what was actually spent?
yes, we certainly have the technical capabilities to add that to a Quincy Farm page. It's just something that we haven't had to do in the past, but we absolutely have the technical ability to do
I'm
that.
asking a bigger question. Why don't we have everything that we spent last year? Why isn't that something you can?
For Quincy Farm, or are you talking about bigger than that?
I'm talking about.
We
our
can do
whole
that.
Budget.
I'll work
whole
with
budget,
Laura.
not just Quincy
Everything the city
Farms.
spent last
Okay.
year across the city.
I mean, I think,
'Cause I was
I
gonna-
think it
'cause
could
my
be as
thing was on
simple.
Quincy Farms, what was spent is in that report. And by the way, the report's prepared by the Land Preserve, presented to
Right.
council, and then accepted by council. My view is that is a city report.
Was what the city spent in, I don't think I.
Yeah, it did. It talked about what was spent and then what is proposed and then for the next year.
It does talk about, okay, maybe I
So-
didn't see that.
Now, it's not a Doug Farman prepared type of thing, but it sits back and broadly sits back and says, here's what was done last year, here's what's going to propose for the next year.
But it doesn't say the city spent $30,157.79.
Yeah, it's not going to be like that.
That's what he was looking for. Just so that, I mean, that's what he was asking.
And because the audit isn't complete until June, we won't have 2022 actual numbers until June.
Right.
Just so everyone understands the timing.
But it just got me thinking of the bigger question is why don't we have on the internet what we spent last
To
year?
get people away from looking at line item details.
We sort of do, no, but we sort of do because each budget has actuals for the previous year and the previous 2 years.
It's a year and a half or 2 years delayed.
Well, there's an unaudited and then there's an audited.
There's an estimated.
Yes.
It says estimated.
And so once the audit is completed, then
But-
that can
but-
be put up there, but.
But the way your new format is, it's not going to be out there until like September or October, right? When the new budget is presented to, the audited numbers won't be out there until the new budget's presented to council for the next year.
We can definitely put the line items up there right now. I'll work with Laura on that, but it will be just through 2021 until June.
Until June,
Yeah.
right, because we won't have the audited number. I'm not saying we have to, I guess I'm just bringing that
No,
up.
but I think that is, because I
From a
know
clarity
I've
standpoint,
I've
and
needed that
transparency.
information myself, and I generally get it by going back and looking at either agenda packets, or if it's, I go back to the budget to see it for
Yeah,
the,
and
but there is a delay between.
Well,
And I get that, but I don't think we should ask residents to go through.
Sure.
council packets.
I do think that when we switched over and used some new software to help with the budget, that somewhat standardized process maybe changed what was available to the public on a line-by-line basis. So knowing that we do have that new system in place, let staff go back and take a look and see what we can't do to somehow supplement that and provide that line-by-line actuals somehow. I don't know what that looks like yet.
Yeah,
But-
and then the second question is, that was really just something else that just occurred to me in looking at all this, but then the second question is, do we want to put on the Quincy Farm page what we spent?
That is, I think, a much easier conversation to have. I absolutely think we could probably figure out a way to put expenditures,
Okay.
actuals
They just
on
may
the.
lag.
There will definitely be a lag, for sure, but.
But they don't need to be a 2-year lag, it's just until you.
No,
get
yeah,
audited.
that's right, yeah.
Okay,
Thank you. Al?
go ahead, Earl.
But one thing that I wanted, because I do think this is, and again, we want to be as transparent as possible, but we also want to we don't want to be creating a bureaucratic nightmare for our staff.
Well, and-
Okay?
and-
And my view is one of the, well, I just wanted to say, one of the things that I really like is whether it's the software, or what we're doing, showing those pie charts, showing what's spent on various categories, et cetera, et cetera. And to me, if someone said, no, I want to know line item 38.25, which is what did we spend on erasers, my view is you make an inquiry to staff, you make an inquiry to your city staff, and then they work with you to do it. That's not something that I would expect to be put on the website, et cetera. That's just my view.
Well, and that's why I'm bringing it up, is are we comfortable saying, you know what, we posted our audited financials, and you can get in there and find it, or you can call, but we're not going to break expenses out on a line for every single thing? Or do we say Quincy Farm is something that, people do have concerns about, and
Yep.
it is
Absolutely.
so maybe it's worth putting it out.
Right, those, like I
But
say,
but that's
broad
not saying we're going to do,
categories.
we're not now going to tell you every penny that we spend on Blackmore Commons,
Right, and exactly, that's. and
other
so I-
than in a broad category with other parks or something.
And Quincy Farms, I think, is an important one. In fact, I was just asking Emily before, when they talked about the weed whacker contract, and I said, now, this is whacking all of our weeds all over the community, but I said, we are going to be able to break out what we've done with Quincy Farms, because I think that is important, that we always know what's going on with Quincy Farms for a myriad of reasons.
Yes.
And she basically said, yes, we are, that's the answer I expected, and that's the one we got, so.
And I just had an idea even with the new software, we can break out Quincy Farms, so it'll be fine. going
I would like
forward.
to thank Emily for spending a lot of time with me today on going over all of that, so I understood what was up. That's all.
Okay, thank you.
I want to thank some of the members of the community, the judge and the Crapos, for what they hosting the meeting last night. I never participated in a meeting like that. It was basically 100% of the meeting, and I want to thank Katie for running the meeting and being able to put together a meeting where there was, 4 or 5 mayors there, council people. I know a lot of our council people were there. And I think it was important that we expressed the sentiment, which I think was basically unanimous, to our 2 senators who listened in, and hopefully they at the end of the meeting, I think we saw where they were going with this. And I think just the fact that this community, Cherry Hills Village, took the leadership role to do that, I think was just fantastic. And I want to thank the judge, the Crapos, and our mayor for putting that thing together last night.
If I could clarify, I just want to make sure everyone knows that that was not a city-sponsored event. That was an event that was organized by the Judds and the Crapos, to which we were invited. And
I
we
would
were
call it more of an
delighted to be there.
an
But
event than a meeting.
yes, it was not a meeting. It was an event that they organized, and
I had several constituents that texted me and said how impressed they were with the meeting and how much they felt heard. So whether it works or not.
we shall see, right? All right, Randy.
Okay, well, let me build on that a little bit. I think we owe a big thanks to our residents as well. I mean, the response, to the point where it's like too many emails, please stop. I think they rose to the occasion on an important issue, and the attendance last night was amazing, as well as all the correspondence and support and phone calls and dialogue and studying on their behalf. It's great. A couple of other things. I should give credit to Jen. She connected me with a fellow that's involved in self-guided, commercial-grade electric lawnmowers. And so we're having a demonstration, Public Works at the park this Thursday, and I think that's really exciting. Doesn't mean that we're going to buy anything, and we'd obviously go out to bid if there was a decision. But we're starting to get some interesting exposure to some interesting products, and I think that's great. Nothing big going on at DRCOG. I mean, we had the vote last month on the bill, and DRCOG came out opposed. I'm sure we'll have a spirited discussion about pending legislation this meeting, but no big agenda items on the agenda. That's all I have. Thanks.
Councilmember Holen.
Yeah, I'd just like to, extend the thanks to the Crapos and the Judds, as well as our mayor. I thought it was a terrific outpouring, and there was one brave soul that got up and argued the other side. And as I said to him, I said, "Dude, I know how you feel." I said, "I was a nuclear power advocate back in the 70s when I was the only guy in the room and everybody else was against me. So I knew very much how that guy felt, and he was brave to get up there and make the comments he did." I'd also like to say, I'd also compliment Councilor Wheel, because he had a lot to do to push DRCOG over. They were wavering a bit. There was a lot of, abstentions, this mumbo jumbo, and he had a lot to do to push that over the line. And so I thought that was terrific. Other than that, I don't have any other report, but I do have some questions for staff when they make their reports. I guess that comes up at that time. So,
All right, Councilman Eber.
I'll join in and mention Senate Bill 213 again, without going on to the substance of what may or may not come out of the committee's meeting today. While last night's event was certainly well attended, a very, very well attended, we all have spent a great deal of time since the bill was introduced working on 213. A number of us have spent a lot of time, or all of us have spent a lot of time talking to constituents and walking in our districts in particular, or the village as a whole. It is incredible to me still how unaware of Senate Bill 213 our community was until very recently. We came out, and we came out strong, but an unbelievable number of people that I spoke with were like, what's Senate Bill 213? And I wanted to mention it because I think that the letter that we all sent out was an entirely appropriate letter to send. And it was an excellent use of funds and our ability to be able to get out an important message quickly. And it brings me a little bit to the comment that I would sure like to figure out how we can, short of something like that letter, have a message alert on our website, or get, even more people signed up to our village alert system. I know that many are, but boy, this one was one that just screamed that the day it dropped, it sure would have been nice to have 6,500 people know about it. And, so I think the letter has been good. I think the word has gotten out there now. I think our legislators clearly not understand what it is that this community, and frankly, the entire state of Colorado, feels about this bill. And my only comment is our work is not over. In fact, I think you might even make the comment that it's just beginning, because it likely will make it to the floor in some format. And even the amendments don't address many of the concerns that we think we have. So I won't go into the merits anymore on the amendments, but I do think it's my call out to all of us, to those who are watching, that we have a whole lot of information dissemination still to be doing. That's my report.
I couldn't agree more, and even regardless of what happens to this bill this year, I think our work is just beginning, so.
Let me just add one more thing. I do think the one thing that comes up out of this, or this continued process that you mentioned, is that when a number of us went down to the legislature for the committee hearing, I think it was 2 Thursdays ago, there was a great deal of implied pleasure about beating up on Cherry Hills Village for not helping solve the problem of housing in the metropolitan area. And I do think that whatever comes out of any discussion today, tomorrow, 3 years from now, there is an important aspect that we have to start turning towards the idea of what is it that we can offer in terms of solutions to this issue if we are not interested in having multiplex housing in Cherry Hills, or the types of things that are in this, and actually being part of a solution, or at least a discussion of solutions, instead of just being looked at as, hey, you're Cherry Hills down the block, and of course you're not going to want any affordable housing in your area. So that's it.
Well, let me just comment on that, and I agree with that. But I also think that one of the things that's we are part of the community at large. Not every community is going to be able to contribute the same thing to the quality of life in the community. I think that's a concept. It sounds self-serving, but it's real. Every community is not going to be able to contribute the same things. So while I do agree that we have to figure out what can we do specifically to try to help with affordable housing needs to be taken also in the broader context of what the community and what the broad community needs overall, and what is it that we can contribute. And one of the things that I think about from time to time is that, we are open space. We are wildlife corridors. We are dark skies. That is one of the things that we can offer, and that's one of the things that you hear from our constituents every now and again when they say, keep everybody out of here. No, that's not what it's about. and that kind of came up when we did the Highline Canal connection. I mean, there were people saying, why are you connecting the canal and the underpass? We're part of the broader community. There are things that we can contribute overall. There are some things that we're not going to be able to contribute, just like Sheridan's not going to be able to contribute some things that we can. So I just hope that that's where this thing goes overall.
Agreed. Okay, city manager and staff.
Yeah, I'm going to do mine first real quick. There is a lot of effort by staff for 213. I do want to just remind council, we talked about this last week. We have repeatedly attempted to use all of our communications available at our disposal to let our residents know about all the updates. We have been posting social media updates on this topic alone every few days. We are attempting to have an article or a letter to the editor or something in the Villager every single week. We do the notify me every time we do the social media. So we are doing our best. I do think, it takes two to tango, and some folks need to be ready to read it or hear it or find it. So we are doing what we can, and we will continue to do that. Hats off and kudos, especially to Laura and Paul, for really helping take the lead on that side of things and doing a great job.
Can I make a comment about that? I think you have done, and I think the city's done an amazing job. I think staff's done an amazing job. I think it was great, the letter that we sent out with all of our names on it, but only one person's getting the grief. But one of the things that I do think, and I know I've talked with Ms. Divendal about this. There's only so much you can do. This is literally about. It literally was almost like dragging people out. We've done about as much as we can do, and yet there are still people that just don't pay attention. There's only so much you can do. But this is an example of, I don't know what more this city could do on any issue than we've been doing here, and yet there's a lot of people out there that are clueless.
Well, we've talked at a staff level, no matter what comes out of this legislative session, let's just say the whole thing gets killed outright. Let's say it passes in full as drafted. Either way, this will become a year-long process for staff on communication, outreach, et cetera. That, just because the legislative session ends, doesn't mean the work for the next legislative session doesn't start soon thereafter. So with that said, I do know that the committee has actually taken some action. They did approve the first amendment regarding the middle housing, reducing it down to 30%. I don't believe that is I don't think they've taken action on the bill as a whole. So it sounds like they're going to be going through amendments one at a time. I would offer to you that's a bad news amendment.
I agree.
guess they voted according to party lines. So with that, I'm going to shut up so that we can go home and listen.
And, I would really like to echo Earl's comments. I think, I hesitate to use the word ambushed, but the way this bill came out with virtually no information, and it's dropping, 5 weeks before the end of the session, and the committee hearings are 8 days later than it dropped. I can't say whether it was purposeful or not, but it was not a process that was conducive to having a lot of advanced warning. And I think what you did with your team, staff at large, was just terrific. In terms of getting the word out to many corners. And yep, there will always be people that'll be aloof. There will always be, folks that are traveling or who knows what. But I think it was a great job. Sure, could we improve? Yeah, refine always. But at the same time, I was very impressed, and like I said, with the reaction as well. I think you guys did a great job, and under the circumstances, I think it was well done.
Well, and Chris, before you jump in, I just want to reiterate, my report was not so much it was nothing but a positive for the city and the staff.
Sure.
I meant it was almost more for the record of a call to arms to our citizenry.
Sure.
That I want to make it clear that this issue isn't going away.
I would agree.
And this issue is one that, and there are going to be 10 other issues that are going to be existential threats coming our way. And it's a call to arms that people need to start understanding what's going on all the time, and not when it's just in their backyards, and not when it's just something that is as high profile as this one.
Well put, and I wasn't trying to sort of respond to you specifically. I just wanted to make sure that, especially for TV audience or whoever, just so that everybody knows what we're trying to do as a city collectively. City council has been tireless, and it's pretty inspirational to see, especially from a volunteer group. So with that said, and Mayor Pro Tem, I appreciate your letter to the editor, to the Villager this week. That was very helpful. Okay, so with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Doug for director reports.
Thank you. No real report this evening, but I did want to commend our city clerk, Laura, because she really kept us on track with this sales tax issue. So phase 1 is under our belt, and thank you very much for your patience and stepping out of your city clerk realm a little bit and learning about sales tax.
Good evening. On behalf of the chief, I just wanted to share one thing, and that is as a year has come that he's been here, one thing that he wanted to do was order a full audit of our property room inventory. That audit was completed on March 31st of this year, and it included everything to what high-risk items such as currency, guns, ammunition, drugs, and jewelry, as well as other evidence to include found property, items to be destroyed, and also auction items. I'm happy to report that at the conclusion of that audit, it was found 100% complete accuracy. So I just wanted to pass that along.
I've got a couple of questions for the commander. By the way, I appreciate that. And I think actually you were here the last meeting and I asked this. With regard to the report, and I said, hey, it seems like there's not as much detail in the monthly report from the police as there used to be. There used to be a narrative talking about some of the aspects that go, I missed that. And if nothing else, to be able to sit there and go, hey, there were eight car break-ins and 7 of them had the keys in and, the cars unlocked. I think that's important to know what sort of is happening within our community. But what's kind of the thrust there with regard to a more abbreviated statistical report?
So as you know, unfortunately, I'm fairly new here.
Right.
So I'm not really up to date on how the reports were provided previously. But I will definitely, this is something that I will take back to the chief.
I know that when I talked to the chief about that specific request, because he wasn't here that night, he indicated that that was part of some of the changes of information that he was trying to avoid some of that information. So with that said, I said, well, I think there's a desire to include some of that information.
Yeah, I think it's important.
So he acknowledged, he understood, and I think he was, because when we actually talked about it was the same night that it was in the council packet, the abbreviated form, for the next, like it was the week after, I think you brought it up. I was like, oh boy, it's going to appear that we just disregarded that request. And so he was like, no, I hear you. So I think there's going to be further, I think he was going to go back and look at some of the previous reports and what kind of information it included that we're hoping to see.
Some of it, from my perspective, is to stay informed, but also we're out there at HOA meetings and other things like that where we can be helpful by communicating some of these things if we understand them better.
Right, and the other thing, which is, we deal with all kinds of issues, but as we know, certainly going through, safety and security just rises to the top. That's what everybody wants to talk about. That's what everybody wants to know. And as such, I want to know, which is picking on what Mayor Pro Tem talked about. The other thing that I want to bring up, I'm probably going to generate a nickname now. I don't know, Mad Dog Holland or something. Because it's about dogs.
You already have that nickname.
Exactly. It's about dogs, and one of the things is it's interesting. People evidently do tune in, because I had a few residents actually bring up my comments that I made about the dogs and leash laws last time. And it prompted me, now, do we keep statistics with regard to how many citations we write for dogs off leash and versus how many warnings we give? Or do we keep any statistics on dogs at all?
We can definitely pull stats for any citations that have been written as far as warnings given. I don't know necessarily if we would have that. Of course, if there's a call generated or the code enforcement officers or even the patrol officers are putting themselves out on a call for service, then absolutely that'll be documented in our CAD system and we can pull those. what is the variable there is if they're not, if they're just going out and they run into somebody on the street, and maybe they talk to somebody and they get something, and they do kind of a quick drive around the area to look for such resident with dog off the leash, and they don't find it, they may not necessarily enter it into the computer system, and so for that reason we wouldn't be able to track that. But 100%, any citations, any calls for service, all of that stuff is able to be tracked.
Right. I guess if nothing else, I'd be curious to see how many citations we might have written, let's just say in the last year, for dogs off the leash. And again, this is anecdotal, right? I mean, you never rely on anything, even that our residents might tell us, because how do you know whether it's true or not? But I got kind of inundated with some stuff about, boy, our police are great. I mean, everybody thinks our police is great. But this group anyway, to a large degree, thought we ain't doing anything about dogs off the leash. And so, I'm just reacting to what I heard, and so I'm following up in that regard. So that's kind of where it's coming from.
Hey, Earl, just so that you know, we do have a piece coming out in the next Crier about dogs should be leashed when you're on city property, and just reminding people that, and that the officers are out watching for that.
Terrific. That's great. That's important, I think.
I will just weigh in real quick on that idea that when we're talking about leash, I've had a number of my fellow neighbors talk about electronic leashes. Oh, really? Just saying.
That's interesting.
Similar to an electronic fence, I guess? Okay.
That's all I got.
I.e., my dog is on perfect control because of an electronic device that I have. And they can be 50 yards away or 100 yards away, but that's fully under my command. I'm just saying I've heard it.
I'm glad your dogs are on leash. They're vicious.
Okay. Yep, over here. Laura or Paul or, nope.
I'm going to keep mine extremely brief because I know that we're all interested in getting back and getting up to speed with 213. But you will notice that I put a one-page handout on your dais this evening. As part of our CRS, as part of our community rating system through FEMA, we're required to report to you all on progress associated with the Arapahoe County Hazard Mitigation Plan that we are a part of, and we helped draft and council did approve. And so for context for you, that's why you received it, is because we get points for that as part of our CRS audit, which we are currently going through, and that will be over in May 1st, as if we don't have enough.
Thank you. I was wondering what this was. And city attorney? Okay. I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
All right, we stand adjourned.
We'll find out.
They accepted that amendment.